Well, two things. There's my question about morality. First, I would like to say you fail to appreciate that most theists don't understand the difference between disrespecting them and disrespecting their religion.
Well, whose problem is that? When I spell it out, and I have spelt it out many times in a very clear way, and I have spelt it out with Jack personally. I respect him as a person. I respect every human as a person, but I don't respect their views. I've made that abundantly clear. So whose problem is it if they don't get that message?
I mean, his ultimately, that's true. But my main question was for you. Regarding you're a moral relativist, correct?
I have no idea whether I am or not. It's not a term that I'm familiar with. If you're going to label me, then you need to explain what you mean by it.
Do you believe that everybody has their own subjective opinions on what is and is not moral, and there is ultimately no way to discover who is right or wrong about that?
I'd put it somewhat differently. I do not think there is such a thing as objective morality. That is to say that there isn't, for example, there isn't an objective morality floating in the ether that we haven't been able to tap into. Such a thing would be a nonsense. Objective morality certainly doesn't come from any deity. So yeah, I do not believe in objective morality. I think that the closest you get to objective morality is what society reflects in the laws that it passes and enforces. But pretty much, yes, everyone has their own moral compass.
Okay, well, my question is this: if you believe that there's no objective morality, and ultimately, on the event that societies disagree, would you say that there's no way to tell which society has it right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if you believe that there's ultimately no way to tell who or what society has the correct objective moral standard,
Mm-hmm.
how could you condemn another for immoral actions? For example, let's say hypothetically, there was a YouTube user, Poison Tooth Spotmark, who filed several false DMCAs against certain PDR Jones and then accused him of being a pedophile.
Mm-hmm.
How could you say that Poison Tooth Spotmark was in the moral wrong when he was just doing what he thought was right? He was operating under a moral standard that was acceptable. PDR Jones is operating under a moral standard under which it's unacceptable, and there's no way to say which one has it right.
Right, there are two things there. Firstly, in the hypothetical situation that you're referring to, the person serving the DMCA notices was acting illegally. Now, as I said, laws are a reflection of, as best you can, excuse me, of the objective, the closer you're going to get to is objective morality. That is to say that they are passed by people who, you know, in most countries are elected in some form of democracy. And so, to a large degree, they reflect the consensus of the citizens of that particular country. Now, of course, it's undoubtedly true that they don't reflect everyone's views, nor can they. I mean, for example, someone who is a paedophile, despite the fact that there are laws against it, is not necessarily going to abide by those laws. But society as a whole has determined that paedophilia is wrong. The second point is that let's take your hypothetical one step further and assume that the person that served the DMCA notices received information in the counter notices and then started disclosing that information to anyone who asked him for it. I don't think there are many people that would say that was right. I don't think you need a law book or a Bible to tell you. In fact, the Bible won't help you. No religious book would help you in that situation as to whether that was right or wrong. I don't think that you would say that was right. So where does that judgment that you have come from? My point is that it's innate and it's inherent in you, and you do not need a Bible to tell you. And if it was the case, let me just one more point, and please, I will allow you to respond. Just one more point. If there was such a thing as objective morality, and if it was the case that such objective morality was evidenced in any of the good books, namely the Quran, the Bible, or whatever other religion you would like to pick, then would it not be right to assume that by looking at that good book, you would find an answer to the trolley problem. Now, if you're not familiar with the trolley problem, I can explain it very quickly. You are faced with a position where there's a runaway train and you are in control of a switch. The train is at the moment headed down a track which is going to kill 5 people. You have the option to switch the point to send it down a different track where it will only kill 1 person. Okay? Tell me how studying the Bible is going to answer what the moral correct decision to make is in that circumstance. Now, there are variations of the trolley problem which I won't go into, but my point is you will not get an answer to that question by studying any biblical texts of whatever religion you like.
And I have known, but I at least do not hold the view that you would. The Bible never claims to contain the entirety of an objective moral standard. It obviously doesn't. It couldn't. It was written thousands of years ago, and had God said not to speed, no one would have known what he was talking about.
Pause, puppy. Why couldn't it? It was written, in particular the first 5 books, were dictated by God. Why could he not tell us exactly what we should and shouldn't do? Is he just a crap communicator? Or was it not necessary for him to tell us then? If it wasn't necessary for him to tell us then about the trolley problem because trolleys weren't invented, then why doesn't he come back and tell us? Or why didn't he include it in the book for people to understand when trolleys were invented? I'm sorry.
He had already told us by other means.
Right, okay. What means?
The Bible says that God wrote his moral law on our hearts. We have an intuitive knowledge. God geared up the universe such that we would naturally evolve such a thing. And
what chapter and verse are you referring to?
I forget. I can quote it. I actually can't quote it verbatim, but I would have to look at. I'd have to look that up actually.
So are you maintaining the position that God has imposed on us all this objective morality because He's written it into all of our hearts? And if that is your argument, it's going to fail, isn't it? Because if that was the case, then all of us would have the same morality and agree on all issues. But we don't. You get people disagreeing about all sorts of moral issues. So I'm sorry, if you could give me chapter and verse, the argument's just totally flawed.
Hold on, let me find a searchable Bible.
Sure. Whilst you're looking for that, let's see if either of the other two would like to comment.
Well, take marriage for example. Is monogamy morally correct? Because if it is, why is it that some people in some societies think that monogamy is the correct path, but in other societies polygamy is permitted and acceptable, and in other societies polyandry is permissible because there's far more women than there are men? Why do all of these people feel naturally as if what they're doing is perfectly acceptable if God has put in each of our hearts a moral guideline? And if He has given us these moral guidelines, what's the purpose of the Bible?
Can I interject something really quick before Puppy comes back? I think that while the points that DPR and Rationalizer made about how, relative morality or even, different interpretations of what people think is subjective morality, they can put people at an impasse. But the example you gave, Puppy, I don't think is really an illustration of that. Venom Fang knew that he was being dishonest. It's not that DPR and Venom Fang are working off of basic differences in what constitutes honest, straightforward behavior. The difference is that Venom Fang is one of those people who will lie through his teeth, spread rumors, engage in all kinds of behavior that he would never countenance if it was done to him, or really in any other context. He just makes an exception for himself. So while it's true that, if we live in a society where, DPR thinks that something is all right and Rationalizer thinks that it's wrong, there are these impasses, but this isn't really an example of it. Venom Fang is just someone who makes an exception for himself and always will.
Yeah, I believe that is true. I believe he knows what the moral standard is. I couldn't find it on a searchable Bible, but it says something along the lines of non-believers will naturally conform to something at least very closely resembling the moral standard of God because it is written upon our hearts. And
Well, Puppy, I'll make this offer to you. This is obviously being recorded and it'll be posted on YouTube, on the Magic Sandwich Show YouTube channel. If you want to get back to me at any stage with the specific chapter and verse, I'll add it as an annotation to the video. I didn't want to put you at a handicap by putting you on the spot and asking you for that. I have not heard of that before, so I'm genuinely very interested about it. But I think again. Almighty touched upon a good point there. I mean, people tend to kind of know what is right and wrong, but not everyone. And I mean, for example, this is one of the problems I have with Sam Harris. So far as I understand his argument to be when he, in his moral landscape book, which I confess I have not read, but I have heard him give several lectures about it. What he seems to be trying to do is to create an objective moral code out of a culmination of subjective opinions. And I don't think that he does a very good job at it. He talks about, for example, one of the illustrations he uses is a father throwing battery acid in his daughter's face because she was either going to leave the religion or had had sex outside marriage or something. I can't remember. But he says, everyone knows that that's wrong. Now, that isn't the case. The majority of people know that's wrong, and that is reflected in the laws that are passed. But the person that actually did it did not think it was morally wrong, and this is why I suspect Harris's argument does fail.
so that's a contradiction, at least of what Atheismo said, and you went on to agree with. How do you know that the person who did the Venom Thing X? How do you know when he did that to you? How do you know he did believe it to be morally wrong? Think about what he believes, by the way, DPR. He ultimately believed that you are. He ultimately believes that your actions are going to cause people to go to hell. So it's even understandable why he would think what he did was morally right. And
yes, and this doesn't contradict anything I've said. This actually agrees with what I'm saying, namely that people have their own subjective morality, but there is no necessary agreement. There is generally a correlation between most people's morals, and it comes from the basic rule that do as to others as you would like done to yourself. Now, Venom, and I don't want to go into too much detail, but Venom is not a normal person. Let me leave it, not go into any more detail than that. It doesn't surprise me one jot that he has a completely different moral compass. He has absolutely no ability for empathy, for example. See his comments in relation to amputees not deserving their limbs. This is someone that's not quite right, okay? It doesn't surprise me one jot that he has a different moral view than I do. It doesn't surprise me, it wouldn't surprise me if he can justify everything he does because he thinks he's doing God's work. Quite how stealing from a children's hospital is doing God's work is beyond me. But he's a fucked up twat. Anyway, sorry, I better stop.
Isn't one of the 10 Commandments that you shouldn't bear false witness? So if Sean was lying in order to achieve his goal of not sending people to hell, then surely he was breaking one of the moral codes that God had written on his heart, and therefore he knew that he was being immoral.
Well,
yes, and I agree with that.
I'm sorry, I'll Puppy come back, but then I have something to add.
I was saying, but the thing is, the moral disagreement you have with Venom in the circumstances doesn't come from you having different perceptions of morality. I agree Venom is a sociopath, so he may even be a bad example. But using him as an example anyway, because anything else, or let's say Shock of God, because all he has is narcissism. He's pretty well in touch with reality by comparison. The moral disagreements regarding Shock of God and the phishing scams that he's performed, those come. Okay, another bad example, actually. Some moral disagreements. Okay, perfect example.
Can I help you out, Puppy? Yeah, a lot of the examples of YouTubers and some of the scandals that have arisen, they're hard to fit into the context that it seems to me you're trying to build, because, we have other information about people like Venom and Shock that they were just being very self-serving and using the religion as a pretext. But I will say that, you recall a moment ago we were talking about the Iranian government giving transgender, sex change operations, and I said, in a bizarre way, if you grant many of their religious premises, that's actually a logical thing to do. And I think that it is understandable, and this is one of the dangers, this is why we argue against moderate religion, and that is because, you know, you can have someone who isn't really necessarily a sneaky, hateful sort of person, but if they believe that someone else may be, you know, damned to an eternity of punishment, you know, they will be, you know, ready, willing, and able to do some incredibly drastic things in order to prevent that. You know, if they really believe it. You know, I knew a guy. He went to this party, and people were doing various kinds of drugs. And at one point, one of his friends just tackled him to the floor without any warning, and he spilled his beer everywhere. And he got hurt in the fall because he didn't see it coming. You know, he wasn't playing touch football. He was just standing there at a party. And he said, "Well, what in the hell are you doing? What's wrong with you?" Now, his friend had dropped some acid. And he said, "Well, I just saved your life." He said, "Well, what do you mean you saved my life? I was just standing there talking to a girl." It's like, "Well, there was this dragon in a cage, and he asked me to let him out, and I said, okay, but whatever you do, don't hurt my friend Dave if I let you out. And the dragon said he wouldn't hurt you, but when I let him out, he swooped at you, and I had to tackle you to get you out of the way." And, you know, so in that delusional state, he really felt that tackling his friend painfully to the floor was the logical thing to do. And this is the thing, like, you know, we were talking with Hamza and people like that. If someone could be the meekest, gentlest, kindest person and still do some really unfortunate things because, you know, if you grant that it's necessary to prevent someone else's damnation, you know, some really horrible misunderstandings can crop up. Okay, go ahead.
I'm curious, Puppy, because there's a few questions I have for you, if that's all right. So far as I understand it, beginning of the year-ish, you were a young Earth creationist and supporter of the views expressed by the likes of Nephilim Free, and you rejected evolution. I think that you have evolved, for want of a better word, to a degree in that you now accept evolution, but you are still a theist. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm still a Christian.
Okay. Now, do you think, what is your view, going back to the topic that we started with, do you think that mockery and ridicule is an appropriate way of entering into discourse with theists, or does it have any effect on you, or what is likely to have the most effect on you?
I'll answer. First off, I wanted to ask Atheismo, was this dragon like the dragon like Spyro or the dragon of medieval legends, or was this a Tyrannosaurus Rex that Kent Hovind thinks used to be called dragons?
It was actually a parakeet that the guy thought was a dragon.
Oh. But the mockery, I actually did a video on this. I hate the name of the series. I came up with the name of the series as a young Earth creationist, and I'm now stuck with a series called Lies at the Heart of Atheism, and I hate it so damn much. But in its part F, I discussed this mockery and swearing and these such things. I have no problem with swearing, though I just don't like it because I just don't like the way I sound when I swear. But they're okay as long as you're in a situation where you don't need them. If you're swearing because you think it makes your video more entertaining, but you could refute the arguments just as well without swearing, it's okay to. But if you're doing it because you need to, it's not okay to. Same thing with mockery, insults. I actually challenged the Amazing Atheist in that video. I was going to challenge him to respond to one of my Christian videos without any kind of insults, but I realized that was too easy. So I challenged him and any other atheist, by the way, to make a video response to any video by Shock of God without swearing or insulting him in any way or anything like that. And I don't think it's possible.
Well, I've done one.
Really?
Yes, it's on my YouTube channel. I don't swear. I'm perfectly polite. So I don't think that's a particularly good point. Let me ask you another thing. One of the other things we touched upon was the use by some theists of the Bible to support their prejudices, bigotry, and discrimination. Now, I don't know. What is your view? Let's use the topic that we were talking about before. Either, well, I gave two from the 1millionmums.com. One was that they're outraged that a transgender person is appearing on television, and the other is that there's potential for Sesame Street to maybe have what would potentially be argued as a gay marriage. Do you have an issue with either of those?
I mean, I personally don't have an issue with the Sesame Street gay marriage because they're freaking puppets.
Do you have an issue? Do you have an issue with gay marriage generally?
I mean, I don't. I could make a video someday. I actually could.
You've got the opportunity now to explain.
The closest thing. I feel like I don't have a lot of knowledge. I do understand enough evolutionary biology to say that the evolution of their evolution of homosexuality and heterosexuality are fundamentally different, and it's not therefore guaranteed that they should be treated alike. Nonetheless, that given, I can't give an argument for why specifically they shouldn't.
What do you think?
I mean, I as a person, I don't care.
Right. So, in a way, I would argue that your morality is better than that of the Bible. Would you argue against that?
No, because again, the moral.
So your morality is better than the Bible. Hallelujah.
I don't agree with
Why do you read the Bible then?
Does the Bible say that men should, mankind should punish homosexuals, or does it only say to homosexuals, don't have cock and bum fun?
Yeah, it says kill them.
I don't know what, and I know that, and I'm sorry if you think that I'm putting you on the spot, but this is a sort of issue that really upsets me. And going back to my diatribe about Jack, this is what irritates me with him. You could ask me any question. I have the capacity to say, I have no idea, I don't know. But if it's something that I do have a view on, I can actually justify my opinion and my view. Now, what I frequently find with the likes of Jack is when you ask him a question, you can see this disconnect going on in his head, thinking, well, I don't really think that, but the Bible over here is telling me that I should think that. And you can see that almost the mental torment going on in his head. And you see it time and time again with people that, for example, that call into the Atheist Experience show, and Dilla Hunter goes through a similar sort of thing where he sort of says, what do you think? Not what the Bible says, what do you think? And you've done it to a degree. You've pretty much shown, in my view, that your personal morality is actually better than the Bible. Now, if
the Bible does not outline full moral standards,
why do you need the Bible?
That's morality is certainly not the reason. The Bible explicitly says again, it is not the only source of morality. It is not even.
What is it a source for if it's not morality?
Information regarding salvation.
It's totally inaccurate in those regards, isn't it?
Well, can I say, look, in both of you are making points. Okay, Puppy's saying that even the Bible, being a finite text, can't cover every conceivable situation. But the problem, Puppy, is, like DPR saying, it does cover this particular situation. It is very explicit on the issue of homosexuality. So while it's certainly true that not every single conceivable instance is covered by the Bible, this one clearly is, and it says kill them.
I mean, I would cite if I were responding to that directly, I would cite Jesus saying, I would cite two things that Jesus did. First off, Jesus actually saved an adulterer, saying that it was his exact words, I believe. He has no sin.
Well, one second, Puppy, I do want to keep you on topic here. As far as I'm aware, Jesus never mentioned anything about homosexuality, and of course, one has to remember Matthew 5:17. He's not come to change the law. So, as far as we're aware, God's message is that as contained in the Old Testament, and particularly in relation to homosexuality as is contained in Deuteronomy, that homosexuals should be stoned to death. Now, I'm assuming that you don't hold that view. So,
well, can I interject, DPR? Both you and someone in the comment section raised issue with him comparing adultery to homosexuality, but I think it actually is pertinent because Jesus came to the rescue of someone who was going to be sentenced rightfully to death under the old law. So it seems to stand to reason that he had a standard where he might have actually stopped a homosexual person from being stoned to death. We don't know because that example doesn't come up. But I do think that, from a biblical standard, that these situations are actually comparable. But it's just one of those things. Like I'll talk to some Christians and I'll say, blah 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 contradictions in the Bible, and they'll say, "What contradictions?" I'm like, well, the old law says stone an adulteress to death. Then Jesus says, okay, well, don't stone this adulteress to death. And then he says, I've come to uphold the law, which says stone adulteresses to death. So it really causes kind of like a short circuit of really, I think, clear-cut contradiction. But I'm sorry, I interrupted.
If God's law is objective, what was objectively moral about stoning people to death before Jesus came that was objectively immoral after he came?
Yeah, I'd like to answer that. The thing that made the Old Testament law, which the Bible does say we are no longer under, you're simply wrong about that. The thing that made that binding then and not binding now is is the fact that before there was an authority figure, a rightful authority figure, saying to do this thing and not to do this thing. Later, it did not say. Later, we are not under a similar command from a rightful authority figure. So as a result, the situation has changed, and thus the result...
I'm sorry, Puppy, before you go any further, can you tell me where in the Bible it says that? Because I'm sorry, it doesn't.
Well, even if it does say that, whether you're being bound to something doesn't make it moral or not. If someone puts a gun to my head and orders me to do something, then it's probable that I will do it depending on what I'm being told to do. Just because I'm being bound by a gun to my head doesn't mean that what I do next is moral.
That's why I specified rightful authority figure.
So what you're saying is it was moral to stone them before because God said so, but then afterwards it was objectively immoral to stone them because Jesus said that God said so, or God as Jesus said so.
No, it is, here's the thing. There's a moral hierarchy. Some things are worse than others, and when you have to choose between one thing, like, for example, the cart scenario you gave, it is worse for 5 people to die than it is for 1 person to die.
What if the 5 people were convicted murderers and paedophiles, and the one person had led a blameless life?
That complicates the situation to the point where
Well, this is the same situation. This could have been the same woman, right? If the exact same circumstances had happened, say 5 years earlier, she'd have been stoned to death because Jesus hadn't been there to stop adulterers from being stoned to death. So 5 years earlier, the exact same woman committed the exact same crime, would have been objectively morally stoned to death, whereas 5 years later, after Jesus had stopped it, then it's objectively immoral to stone her to death.
Well, has anyone here read any of the Gnostic Gospels?
No, I'm not even done reading. I'm not even done reading reading the normal Bible, and I will probably never read any of the Apocrypha books.
Well, I just think it would be funny if we fished around the Apocrypha and found an account, like a different version of the story, where he comes across an adulterous woman and says, don't stone her to death, and say, oh, but she's not really an adulteress, she's a lesbian. And he says, oh, well, go for it then.
I prefer science textbooks, actually. Those tend to be my favorites.
But I would like to know what was different if it's objectively moral. If it's objectively moral to stone that woman, the same woman, for the same crime, yet 5 years later it's objectively immoral to stone that woman for the crime.
Okay. Let me answer that.
Why is that the case? And if it changes, how is it objective?
Okay. Let me answer that with let me answer your question with a question to help demonstrate my point. Okay, let's say that there is that you are you are in your driveway. You've backed in because it's because you're at a party and you don't want to have, because it's at a party or something. And there's a group of children playing in the street. It is at this point immoral to punch it and drive forward. because the result of that will be to kill them. However, that does not follow then that it is immoral to drive on the highway. Driving is immoral in the situation in which there's a child in front of you, but moral in a situation, or acceptable in a situation where there is not a child in front of you, or even it may be obligatory in a situation where you have a deathly ill person in the back seat and are trying to get them to a hospital. The different
I'm sorry, Puppy. I'm sorry. Maybe I will be coming across as being intellectually dishonest or too simplistic. I'm sorry. You are asked a specific question, and this is what I find irritating. This is why, when Jack says, for example, let's talk about the nuances of my beliefs. How can we talk about nuances when he won't answer a question? And you're doing just the same. You've been asked a specific question. And you've been asked a specific question twice now, and on both occasions you have failed to answer it, and much like a lot of theists do, you have sought to answer it with a question. That is not answering the question. If you do not know the answer, if you don't have an answer, then please just say, I don't know. So please, if you need to hear the question again, then the rationalizer will explain it to you.
Yeah, okay. The answer, rationalizer, is in the circumstances in which there's a rightful authority figure commanding you to do something, it is more if they are commanding you to do something that they are in the rightful position to command you to do, it is acceptable for them to command you to do that, and you should follow that command. While in a scenario where that is not the case, then you should not follow the command. It has to do with the command that the authority figure has given.
So you're of the stance then that it's moral because God said so. So which effectively means that anything that God says is objectively moral. So if God instructed mankind to have sex with pigs and stab children in eyes with blades, would that be objectively moral actions?
In the circumstances you describe, the call is going to explode, but ultimately, yes. However, God would never do that because God
is perfect and good. All right.
Well, no, God has ordered the killing of children.
Wait.
How can you say He wouldn't do it if He already has?
No, let's wait. Let's deal with a specific issue which you will not be able to use the argument that Old Testament and New Testament are different, whatever. Let's take the issue of slavery. Jesus never said anything against slavery. The New Testament does not in any way contradict the Old Testament in relation to slavery, and slavery persisted for 1800 years after Jesus' death. Tell me, what do you think, not what the Bible says, what do you think? Do you think that slavery is acceptable?
No, not under normal circumstances.
Why does the Bible say that it is?
I don't know. One thing the rationalizer said regarding the killing of children. If you're talking about the foreigners, you have to sort of think more along the terms that God would. You have to do your best to put yourself in His circumstances. What is death from God's perspective? Because it's different than what it is from ours. When God would say to, like, for example, with the children of the tribes that were killed in the other countries. From God's perspective, it's like, what do we do with the children? God's like, just send them up to me, I'll deal with it. That's what that is.
Except the young female virgins.
Have you ever contemplated how they actually worked out who the virgins were?
Yeah, I was wondering that. Did God make them glow up or something, or how exactly did they determine which of the females were virgins? I suppose God pointed them out in some way. God made it obvious to the people with the big swords, don't kill these ones, they haven't had any action. But then, why young virgins but not virgins
not
that are a little bit older? Why young virgins and not young people who had only had sex the day before and lost their virginity?
Rash, it's because He's a loving, merciful God and wouldn't saddle one of His old people with some old maid.
No, first off, you have to remember the towns that he commanded people to go after. They were usually there are usually descriptions both in the Bible and on occasion in actual real archaeology of these were not towns that embarked in practices we would consider moral. For example, the Canaanites sacrificed babies.
Right, stop.
Oh, hang on. The Canaanites sacrificed babies. So killing babies is a really bad thing then. Unless, of course, God says, go in there and kill all the babies.
The difference, first, there are two differences. First off, God didn't say go in and torture all the babies by placing them in the hands of a big burning statue of an idol, which is what the Canaanites were purportedly doing. God just said, bash their heads against the wall, and again, he was saying, I'll deal with it.
Sorry.
You've got to be.
Do you remember we were talking about ridicule earlier? And we were saying, is ridicule acceptable?
Exactly.
I'm sorry, when you tell me that, they killed them by burning them, that's terrible. All God said was smash their head off rocks. I'm sorry.
Rash is absolutely right. It's hard not to ridicule. I mean, we are. I don't think. Honestly, I think even many religious people would have to concede that on this time, in instances like this, we aren't going out of our way. Any laughter on our part is, for the most part, involuntary. It's hard not to when confronted like something like that. I mean, I remember when Neff did a vid on the mass murder of kids by the Israelites, and he said, well, what are they going to do, take in all these kids? And I thought, well, yeah, they have an unlimited source of food raining down on them from the sky, and
that was
water
earlier.
Coming out of... What?
The manna was earlier. They had stopped getting manna by then.
I'm sure the all-powerful God could have managed a bit of dinner.
Honestly, I don't know, because I noticed that you were giggling a little bit yourself at our response to your last answer. I can't take you seriously. Now, if you are genuinely being serious, then I think you've got to understand why I have an issue with people such as Jack demanding respect for their beliefs. I'm sorry, your beliefs are a joke. And if that is offensive, tough. It's the reality. Your beliefs are risible.
I'm sorry, can I interject? I think it's really a shame, actually, that modern believers find themselves shackled to the Old Testament. I mean, I've had so many people, get in these arguments, and they dare me to read the Bible. It's like, well, you disagree with the Bible, so you must not have read it. And I think, well, first of all, that's a very erroneous conclusion. But to be fair, I assume the opposite these days. If I hear someone say that they agree with the Bible, I jump to the conclusion often that they haven't read it, because you read it, and it just makes it too easy that they have these passages, especially in the early books. And the thing is, the morality laid down in the Bible is so far removed from the ethics practiced by the average rank-and-file believer. It's a shame. If it weren't for the Old Testament, Christianity would have a much easier time of it, rather than having to defend these things that obviously don't represent.
As Christopher Hitchens mentioned in one of his lectures, and it's something that I have not looked into in great detail, but he referred to just this point. There was a time, and I think Marcion was the person that proposed this, that in the formulation of the new Christianity, he suggested that they free themselves from the hideous tortuous doctrines of the Old Testament, but a decision was made not to do so. And by making that decision, they really have seriously handicapped themselves and put themselves in an awful position of where they've got to do the sort of justifications, as tortuous and painful as they are, as we've heard. I'm sorry, Puppy, make sure that you understand I'm not being disrespectful to you, I'm being disrespectful to your views. The tortuous explanations and justifications and apologies that we hear not only from Puppy but from other people. But there we are. Puppy, I'll give you the last word, but I've got another couple of people waiting, so thank you very much for the call, and I say last word to you.
Okay, I mean, I was just, we've gotten way off topic, but I was just saying, you know what?
Okay. Well, if you have anything to add, thank you for calling in.
Go ahead, send me off.
So I don't know whether I think your microphone. I'm going to remove it. If there was a point that you wanted to make and you didn't make, send me a message. I'll bring you back in.